here. Okay, well, good afternoon on this gorgeous fall day. This is a gorgeous September afternoon, and it looks like it's as nice in New York as it is here. And I'd like to welcome Greg Wyatt, our sculptor, who is kind of our sculptor in residence right now for the St. John's College Quad. And thank you, Greg, for allowing us to do this. This is a real honor. I wanted to give a little introduction before we, get into our interview, but for those of you who aren't familiar with Greg's work, Greg is a sculptor in residence at St. John the Divine Cathedral in New York City. And he's actually a true New Yorker, born in Grandview on Hudson, graduated from Columbia College of Columbia University in 1971 with a degree in art history, and then attended for the National Academy of Design and also taught there. And then also got a master's degree in ceramics from Columbia Teachers College in 1974, and went on to continue on for education and close to getting a PhD in education. So Greg's works can be found worldwide in Italy, in England at Stratford-on-Avon, many monuments in Washington, D.C., Arlington National Cemetery, the State Department, the Folger Shakespeare Library, and now St. John's College. So we're really honored to be able to do this. We had planned a full exhibition of Greg's works for this past spring, but due to COVID, everything was put off. So I asked Greg if he would consider letting us have kind of a little preview exhibition to put up on the quad in anticipation of next fall's full exhibition of watercolors and full maquettes and sculptures and drawings. And Greg generously agreed, and his fabulous team of Tina Jeter and Vince and her team came out in December and put anchors in. It was freezing degrees outside, and then they came in August and installed the sculptures. It was raining, and then just the humidity was just so high you could just cut it with a knife. So they were definitely seeing Annapolis in the full spectrum of weather. So we thank Tina and her team as well as you, Greg. So thank you for taking the time and the effort to put this together for us. I'm Lucinda Edinburgh. I'm the interim director for the Mitchell Gallery and the art educator, and pleased to introduce you, Greg. And if we could just start out with some questions. I know that your father was heavily involved in art, so you grew up in a creative household. So do you have mentors or drawing instructors, or a spiritual guide that you that have kind of steered your career, your personal life, your inspirations?
Well, I grew up, before I start giving an answer, I'm very glad to be here. I'm honored to be here. And Lucinda, I love St. John's College and everything that you provide. And we're doing, I think, very worthy interdisciplinary projects, of which the exhibit that we're going to be viewing is a hallmark, I think, in American education, which includes the academic interdisciplinary reading, as well as the fine arts interplay, in which we bring to St. John's College a joint program for the students, which brings practice in the arts, practice in the recalling the readings. And we've done that in Hastings, we've done that in Paris, and we're going to do that again. So without further delay, let me just be speaking a little bit personally here. My family and I lived in Grandview on Hudson, which is right across the river, at the widest point of the river, where the Tappan Zee Bridge exists. And in 1954, we went to the home, which was an artistic upbringing. My father was a painter. My father taught at CCNY, the city university, uptown, and he was a lecturer. He also created illustrations for the New York Herald Tribune, Prentice Hall. He was expert in linoleum cuts and printmaking. And most of all, well, I love my parents. I always will. And my older brother, Roger, and I completely agree that we were very fortunate to be on the Hudson River and raised with my parents, by my parents, sorry. And we got the family education in reading at the fireplace at night. Herman Melville's Moby Dick, for instance, when I was 14.
Wow.
My brother was at that time 17. And my father also took a special interest in giving us a drawing education, which was inspired by the seminal instruction book, The Natural Way to Draw.
Oh, yes. We have a copy right here on our bookshelf.
Yeah, I have a copy over here on my bookshelf, and I always will. And let me just sort of give a taste of what that actually entails. It means that you're drawing in blind contour. And what you're doing is not looking at your paper and your pencil, but instead you always look at your subject matter. And it brings this Renaissance method, old master's method of eye, mind, hand coordination. And it's amazing. In the beginning, you look down at your finished drawing. And I was 13 when I was first introduced to this method. And everything is scattered. You go, oh my God, is this a method for drawing? Well, if you're gonna stay with it, it gets better and better and better. And all of a sudden, this natural way to draw brings to the practice a great deal of accuracy, a great deal of interplay between depth perception and tactility. And what that means is, instead of drawing an outline, you're drawing a contour line, and the difference between an outline and a contour is that there's a pressure response that gives light to dark modulation of your line. And that gives you, that gives the viewer a sculptural impression.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in the Nicolaides book, he shows a drawing of tracing his hand on a piece of paper.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that?
I do. I am familiar with that.
And then he shows you drawings of contour drawings by students of flowers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I've got it. I've got a very old copy. I don't take my desk apart.
There you are, the green cover, The Natural Way to Draw.
And I think I can show the hand. Well, he's showing students. He's showing a student contour drawing here.
There
But
you
it's a terrific book and it's still in print. So for those who are not familiar.
Well, Kima Nicolades taught at the Art Students League for over 40 years.
Mm.
And it was because of his two students that thought so much of what they received in contour education. They completed the one-year course. This is not a book of just illustrations. It shows as if you were a student for 1 year at the Art Students League. And you're introduced to gesture drawings, massing drawings, all the kinds of things that when I was 13 opened my eyes to the differences and the similarities to two-dimensional and three-dimensional drawings, sculptures, and whatnot. So I also taught at the Art Students League, but more about that later when we talk about model to monument.
So, so your father obviously was a great influence, but you also mentioned a second mentor, a Greek-American sculptor.
Evangelos Fridakis.
And where was he from?
Well, he hailed from Philadelphia, where his professional studio was, and he would commute to the Upper East Side at the National Academy of Design School, and he would teach human anatomy with Roma Plastilina application. And so this institution is on Fifth Avenue, right across the street from the Guggenheim Museum. And at the time of my getting my master's in ceramic glaze chemistry at Teachers College, that was in the afternoon, but in the morning I would go to across Central Park, park my car. At that time it was 10 cents for the meter. In any case, no trouble on parking. I'd scamper inside, go downstairs, and there were 12 of us as students, sculpture students. And Evangelos Fridakis brought me into the world of figurization, sculpture figurization. And so there's no question that my father for drawing and Evangelos for sculpture, both of them were mentors of, I feel so privileged and appreciative.
And you said, just in our discussion, and I asked about sort of your spiritual mentor, and you mentioned Leonardo da Vinci, and he was very complex, so very talented, obviously, but why Leonardo?
Well, example, Leonardo. Example, Rembrandt. Example, Jasper Cobson. Example, Cézanne. Example, Michelangelo. Example, Greek classical sculpture, Roman sculpture, Egyptian sculpture, the pyramids. I mean,
it all comes together. You mentioned a trip that you and your family had taken to Mexico City. Was that your first trip? You said, I think you were about 13. Was that your first trip to Mexico?
Yeah, I think I was 1 year older. I think it was 15. And it was the first foreign country that we had ever traveled to. My mother, my father, my older brother, myself. My parents had very wonderful friends that worked at the UN here in Manhattan. And then they were transferred to the same position in Mexico City. And I wasn't privy to any conversation between my parents and their great friends. But all of a sudden, my brother and I find out that we're on the way to Mexico City. So what this means, what this meant was that my father had an exhibition of his oil paintings at the University of Mexico City.
Mm-hmm.
So it took about a week of driving. My father was the only driver, and I was in the back seat with my brother. And I was reading Travels to the Yucatan by Catherwood and Stevens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Catherwood and Stevens.
Catherwood and Stevens.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially, once the opening reception occurred at the University of Mexico City, my parents, Fred, said, well, you've come all this way. Why don't you continue down to the Yucatan?
Mm-hmm.
And I never heard of something called Yucatan. But in any case, I wasn't the driver, and my parents said, okay, here we go. We went to many sites in the Yucatan: Uxmal, Palenque, Chichen Itza, Tula, Oaxaca, Veracruz. And when we arrived at Palenque, that was the big epiphany for me. We had already climbed the pyramids of the sun and the moon at Mexico City, but these pyramid sites are also in the Yucatan. So my father, my brother, our whole family climbed up the Palenque temple, and it was at this temple, as told to us by Catherwood and Stevens, the tour people at Blanca. They said in the early 50s, archaeologists discovered, after a 2-year investigation, removing rubble, stones, and boulders at the top of the pyramid, that once it was free to go all the way down, some 75 feet, there was a entablature, a gravesite. The only one at that time that sort of recalled the Giza pyramids. And it was astonishing to have that experience. Even more so was looking at the carved limestone glyphs of the corn gods. And that taught me something about relief sculpture. So all in all, I hope I've provided a good answer for everyone.
So that was your inspiration for sculpture. So, you've had a good academic background, for art, and certainly, support, from the family. And it's interesting that you chose sculpture, to all other forms. And I asked you about the difficulty and marketability because sculptures just don't, unless they're small, hand-sized things. And we talked about this, that they don't move easily. They're not, and particularly bronze, they're not as transportable as a drawing, or, well, some paintings can be very large, but it's a very deliberate kind of medium. Thinking about installation, it has lots of other components to it. So did you find it more difficult to sort of market the idea of sculptures compared with drawings, or did you find the challenge equal?
Well, I guess a good way to answer this is I've only displayed in professional commercial galleries on 2 occasions. I think the first one was on Madison Avenue at 81st Street or 82nd Street, the David Mann's Bodley Gallery. which no longer is there. Lieutenant, did you ever hear of Oakley
Yes, I have.
and David Mann? Yeah. And I displayed a few drawings, but mainly bronze sculptures. And then my second experience was at the Kennedy Galleries with Larry Fleischman. And I remember the opening reception, the New York Times was there, and they took this photo and they wrote a caption for the next day's newspaper. And there I was with Arlene Dahl, the famous actress, and someone who I met at the opening. I think there was one of my sculptures in the grouping. But, you know, perhaps I'm not the best sculptor to ask the question because I spend a great deal of energy and belief system in exhibitions and permanent placements, you know, in the nonprofit world. St. John's College.
And why bronze? I mean, why not marble or clay or, you know?
Well, a good way to think about that is when I was teaching in San Marino, Italy, way back when, I had never been to Europe before. A lot of my friends had. And on my first travel, I was asked to be an instructor in ceramics. This is about the period when I was at Teachers College getting my master's in glazed chemistry. And I was also teaching at Riverside Church in their arts and crafts program. But in any case, on weekends, the instructors were free to travel through Tuscany and so forth. And I remember going to Venice for the first time. I went to Bologna. I went to Milan. But when I came into the Palazzo Vecchio in Florence, and by the way, my leaf tea is from Palazzo Vecchio. Any case, there in the loggia at the corner is the bronze monument of Benvenuto Cellini, his Perseus. And I had already been to the Bargello, the sculpture museum of Florence, which was originally a 13th century prison, but in the 19th century converted to a sculpture museum. And many of your students, I'm sure, have been to Florence and gone to the Uffizi. They've been in the square, but what I didn't know, and how could I know, because I had never been to Italy before, is Cellini had right before me the model to monument example. That just blew my mind. And at the time, I had been pursuing a beginning teaching career at NYU. And in the moment of looking at this Perseus, I said in my mind, I'm not going to take the fall semester first teaching assignment. I'm resigning. My parents thought I was insane. But I think it was one of my best decisions. It certainly changed everything in my life. And when I'm talking with my students at the Art Students League or St. John's College, I remind them that have courage, have bravery, follow your instincts, and it'll be a better world for you.
Well, maybe this is a good opportunity. I can do a screen share here and show some of the maquettes that you have here on campus, because these are the models that go on to monuments, and we can actually see some pictures of some of your other things. Let me just pull up our you said this is the Newington Cropsey green. So I'll just interject in here a little bit. This is Tina and her team when they're installing the sculptures on the quad here on the backside of McDowell Hall. So they're actually up on the steps looking down towards College Creek. So you can see there are 4 sculptures that are installed at that point. There are, well, it looks like the other 2 are here. There's actually one on the side, and you can see that it was raining that day. And you can get a sense of the weather. This is kind of a bit mapped, but this is installations. It's actually the Tempest. But what I like about this shot, it gives you a sense of the scale of this, although you've got a student in the background. These stand pretty tall. And you can get a sense of the scale here on the lovely patina. Here you can see them in the midst of installation while they're doing this. So what I asked Greg about doing, since our installation shots on the quad don't really show the fine detail, I've pulled up images from the studio, and these are the pieces that are on view on the quad. And so we've got, these are all Shakespeare, Twelfth Night, Macbeth, Falstaff, and the interesting narratives with this, because for the most part, it's not just one character. And so, Greg, you try to involve, do you try to involve, all of the components of the story or a scene? I mean, I know for Falstaff, he is just by himself, but generally in these, have you been trying to encompass bits of the narrative, or just from a particular act?
Well, these are 3-dimensional sketches, if you will.
Mm.
We call them bronze maquettes. They're a very intimate viewing experience. And when I'm creating these, I'm not worried about fidelity or issues of accuracy.
Mm-hmm.
The whole idea is to give an arrested moment in which there's a key passage in Act 1 through 5,
Mm-hmm.
line something.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And actually, these maquettes, before they were casted in bronze, they were plaster casts, which I could put in the overhead compartment on the airplane. And I brought them to Stratford-upon-Avon for a look-see and hopefully approvals. Those days, you could do that. And I did do that. And I presented these at the Shakespeare Center in Stratford-upon-Avon to my academic mentor, Sir Professor Stanley Wells. Sir Professor Stanley Wells, CBE. He denied it, and deservedly so. And also, these were presented to Roger Pringle, who is the emeritus director of the Shakespeare Center. So I'm presenting maquettes in plaster approval to great Shakespeareans.
But even plaster is pretty, that's pretty hefty. So how many of these did you take over?
5.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it was a different day.
Yeah, it was a different day. I mean, if these were the bronze maquettes on pedestals, forget about it. I'd have to Federal Express or DHL over in a wood crate. But I only took the sculpture component in the plaster cast, bought my plane ticket, went over there, and we had our meetings.
Wow.
And the way the story goes is they liked the one of the Tempest. They said, well, I remember at breakfast, Stanley Wells said, come around the corner with me to Shakespeare's Great Garden. It was a very foggy, misty morning. We finished our English breakfast with leaf tea and so forth. And he showed me a bird bath on the step platform, which is the entranceway to the garden. And he said, I would like to put the enlargement of the Tempest as a monument to Shakespeare right here. Well, I couldn't believe it.
Wow. So
there was no sense of a sculpture trail. It was simply one monument. 6 months later, everyone apparently liked the monument. And then phase 2 took another decade to create the additional bronze monuments throughout the Great Garden.
So how many scaled models do you have before you got to the full-size monument that's in Stratford?
I have 5.
Okay.
And those are on display on the quad.
Right, right. But I mean, are there intermediate sizes?
You have the Falstaff mid-size model, and you have the Macbeth mid-size model.
Which I'll go back to this. The Macbeth is fabulous. I mean, he's so tortured, double bubble, toil and trouble, the words of the witches, and along with his wife and all of the woes. I mean, it's just all,
it's murder as a lifestyle.
Yes.
I'm looking carefully at this bronze maquette. There's 2 portraits. One is on the right side, the other one's upside down on the left side. I'm trying to show the mental instability of Macbeth.
Well, it's this is actually a good studio portrait, but seeing it in person, you get all the nuances with it. This one we talked about. I just love this sculpture just because Falstaff was such a grandiose braggart, and having this beer belly and foot, on a beer barrel, and even the attitude of his hand, he's got this, there's no lack of confidence.
No, he's on top of this with a pillow on his head. And in his right hand, he's holding the sherry sack, and all the while balancing on this beer barrel. That's not something I could ever do, even when I was 25.
But really, I think it really gives a good character study, of Falstaff from the Henry play. Another of Twelfth Night, and the backside. We were talking about this earlier. It's interesting to see these on the quad and see them in person, and then trying to identify them, on slide, because the light is so different. This is actually the backside of the Midsummer Night's Dream. But one of the things that I like about seeing this on the slide is you see all the textural qualities. And even though it's bronze, it very much has a feel like clay, like when you manipulate clay, with your fingers and your thumbs. That it has a lot of tactile representation, that you can, you're not touching it yourself, but you sort of get that essence. And is that something you try to do? I mean, obviously any sculpture is very tactile, but these in particular with the surfaces, it feels like, clay that's been worked and then just paralyzed in this moment of time.
Well, I do have to say that there were more maquettes of the maquettes that are on display.
Mm.
There's no guarantee that just one creation is going to be, the most successful.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
for every one that I brought to Stratford,
Mm.
others that I left at St. John the Divine Sculpture Studio.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing I want to communicate, that bronze casting, in addition to the expense of casting, that gives sort of a discipline about the high bar of what deserves to be in bronze. In the model to monument philosophy of sculpture creation, you want to have the freedom to see the implications of when you're right and when you're wrong. Not that it's, that cut of a distinction, but being a sculptor takes a great deal of energy, a great deal of passion. So there's not too much room for being sort of a lazy, half asleep sculptor.
No, it's not a serendipitous medium. I know you have to be proud of all of these. I mean, they are kind of your children in a way, but I wonder also, I asked you if you had a piece that you're most proud of, and that's sort of like choosing a favorite child, but you mentioned the Peace Fountain at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. And why this piece?
Well, there were actually three pieces, but in terms of bronze monument, the Peace Fountain was my first commission for the cathedral. And I'm very proud that the dean and I presented before the 50 Board of Trust directors. And in December of 1982, it was a unanimous decision to go forward to celebrate in sculpture the 200th anniversary of the New York Episcopal Diocese. Now, at other cathedrals and churches, there were other 200th anniversary celebrations, but at the cathedral, there was two celebrations. One was in front of the cathedral, the other one was at the Peace Fountain. And I'll never forget that day because there was a drought in May, on May 20th, 1985. That was the unveiling day for the sculpture. And Dean James Sparks Morton appealed for a 6-hour dispensation to bring the waterworks for the unveiling, and it approved. So during the ceremony, of course, there were public talks. And then at the right moment, I pulled my ear like this to the plumber that was over there, and he turned the valve and the water came out. And there's a beautiful series of photographs, of which this is one, celebrating the unveiling of the monument. Now the monument is 40 feet tall. It features at the top, I think it is plain to see, a rising Saint Michael. In his right hand is the sword, and the mother, quote unquote, giraffe is on his bosom, a very caressing gesture. And people say, well, what's this idea about the giraffes? And I said, well, in all of animal nature, the most sort of balletic animals are the giraffes. And they're also mute.
Oh. Hmm.
And so I just thought it was fantastic.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, I didn't know giraffes were mute, so that
yeah,
adds to my, that's an interesting factoid.
yeah, I mean, here they are circling St. Michael,
Mm,
top to bottom.
and then,
There's a one right here kissing the lip of the moon. Say, well,
yeah,
what
right
about the
here.
element of time?
Hmm.
I say, well, on the Amsterdam side, I have the moon face, and on the cathedral side, I have the sun face.
Hmm. Hmm.
Then they ask one more question: what is that giant crab?
That I was just going to ask, is this a lobster claw or?
Oh, it's a crab claw,
Uh,
and below this photograph is the portrait of Satan.
oh,
And then below that is the double helix inspired pedestal.
mm, wow. And is this about 40 feet?
Tall.
Yeah, 40 feet
Things
tall.
are 17 feet wide,
Mm-hmm.
give you a sense of scale.
Mm-hmm.
And
I know that you
it
said
weighs,
this was,
it
I'm
weighs,
sorry.
it weighs 16 tons.
Wow. I know you said this was one of about three that you're particularly proud of. The other two are at Stratford.
Um, well, in heroic scale, I'm very proud of the Supreme Court Justice standing portrait of Justice Scalia.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, it has many fine details of figurization.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Then on smaller scale, what I'm holding up right now, I don't know if everyone can see this, but this is a bronze casting from Modern Art Foundry,
And let me pull this up. There we go.
which I'll turn. And this is how the Peace Fountain started.
Hmm.
You see the double helix pedestal?
Oh, down here.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And while I'm at it, I'll show everyone the bronze maquette of Columbia University's Scholars Lion. And I think you have a photograph of this.
I do. I do. I'll go back to the screen share of that and pull that up. Let's see here. There we go.
Yeah.
Mm. And what is the size of this one, Greg?
It's 9 feet wide, 4 feet tall, and it's on a pink granite pedestal.
Mm. Wow.
Which is not shown in the photograph, but
Mm.
what I'm, why is the title The Scholar's Lion?
Mm.
My answer was to commemorate the bravery of academic freedom.
Mm.
The Scholar's Lion is not just a lion. It commemorates the liberty to teach in the classroom scholarship without any undue interference.
Well, all of these, I mean, just by scale alone, or just, are really impressive. But I when I look at the scale of these, and we talked about, what was your most difficult installation. You mentioned the Soaring American Eagle, and this is a great story. Do you mind sharing that?
No, I would love to do that
Oh,
this time.
we've got a few minutes, and we also have people that ask questions too. Oops, I'm too quick with my.
Okay.
I managed to pull these up from off the internet, Greg, so they're probably a little bit grainy, but I think it gives the essence of that this was not. Well, let's just go move that sculpture today.
Well, as the story goes, the monument entitled the Soaring American Eagle was commissioned, and it was casted at the Helix Art Foundry in Beacon, New York. It's a two-part monument. There's a pedestal and the sculpture of the eagle. And we had to transport on two flatbed trucks both of the components of the monument. We had a police escort provided by the US State Department all the way from Beacon, New York down to C Street in Washington, DC. They stayed there overnight. The next morning, the provided helicopter, because, you know, it's not like you can go through the glass doors with something so big. You had to airlift it over the top of the State Department 8th floor, where the Secretary of State's office is. You had to go above that and drop it vertically downward into the north courtyard.
And what kind of weight are we talking about here, Greg?
Not as much as Peace Fountain, but I think it was weighed in at the foundry at about 12,000 pounds.
Wow.
And don't forget, all bronzes, small or medium or large, are hollow.
Right.
And there's no use to wasting all that money and all that time casting solid monuments. You know, solidity is for stone carved monument. Bronze casting, lost wax process gives you a hollow, physically hollow sculpture. But what matters, of course, is the skin, if you will, of the monument. Now, inside the monument is a lot of stainless steel armature. Carries the weight. Make sure the public safety is ensured.
So they lifted this.
With the helicopter.
The helicopter.
Pedestal went first, as you might imagine, to the north courtyard side. And then all of a sudden, from the White House, the Clinton White House, was a stand down all traffic in Washington, D.C. Order. And we didn't know this at the time, but it was Madeleine Albright and President Clinton deciding in the middle of their meeting to go over to Camp David. So over a 45-minute waiting period, the winds picked up. And then the roaring of the same helicopter, the chopper propeller, picked up the sculpture, brought it over the north courtyard, and slowly and carefully brought it down and down and down. But because of the wings, the aerodynamic, everything started to sway and move as it went down. And they gave us two chances. And the fact of the matter is, two stainless steel armature rods, like a Roman joint, are supposed to go from the bottom of the eagle to the top of the pedestal. And we couldn't, because of the swaying, we couldn't get that alignment to happen. So they gave us one final chance. 13 of us, including the installation team, the Helix team, myself, and a couple of my assistants, with ropes and all the strength we could do. We pulled so hard and we got it done.
Wow.
That's, you know, if I remember on the second chance, the sculpture, the eagle sculpture, almost hit the inside of the State Department.
No. I mean, this is just nail biting.
Nail
Because it's not something that can be easily manipulated. Yeah.
In the Washington Post news story.
Mm. I'll have to look that up. I'll have
Uh,
to look that up. I was living in the area, but I'll have to look up that that article.
Well,
Wow.
Cindy, you asked me that question, and I hope I provided you.
Yeah, yeah, that's pretty heroic.
Surprised I don't have a pacemaker, you know?
Yeah, no, it's definitely nail biting. We talked about this, the Lions the Scholars Lion. I mean, much easier installation than what you had.
Even the Peace Fountain is easy.
Yeah, and then the Peace Fountain. So, well, I know that we will have an exhibition of your work next fall, but do you have anything that you're currently working on?
Yes, I'm working with the National Park Service, homaging the portraits of the Hudson River School masters. In 2018, I had a 6-month exhibition at Yellowstone National Park of 3 of the masters, Thomas Moran, Albert Bierstadt, and Stanford Robinson Gifford. And then those works were exhibited also in Woodstock, Vermont, and they're still there on a 3-year exhibit, open air, in their courtyard, in their garden rather, at Marsh Billings Rockefeller Historical Park. And now the superintendent of Vanderbilt Mansion, again, National Park Service, has approved a 1-year exhibition with the portrait of Thomas Cole, the founder of the Hudson River School of Painting, and also Bierstadt and Gifford and Moran.
We have a question. We have
a sculpture garden at the University of Massachusetts at Bridgewater State College.
We have a question here, Greg. I don't know if you know that the Mitchell Gallery has a book club. We read a book for every exhibition related. Sometimes it's fiction, sometimes nonfiction, but we're reading the book Hagseed by Margaret Atwood. And someone has written and asked if you could point out the individual elements in the Tempest maquette. So if I can pull that PowerPoint back up and let's see, go back to the Tempest. Let me pull up a bigger. So if you could pull, just mention some of the elements that are, because we're only seeing this from one side, unfortunately, but we see the face here.
Okay, this is the imagined face because we never know exactly what Prospero looks like. It's an impression, it's an invention, and you have the Prospero sort of dreaming or magical face. And then over here to the left, you have the boat, right? The boat in the storm, mast breaking, which is the beginning of Act 1. I think the first line is "What ho," and then everything is stormy, and people are. The crew is rescued. At the top, we have a site-specific apple tree, which is around the sculpture garden. So I want to bring the idea of tree bark. And then if you look very carefully, there's the image of Ariel's portrait right in this area here.
Let's see, in here?
No, up here. I'm using my pen. I don't know if you can see.
Okay, let me see. No, I can't see your pen.
Yeah, okay, I'll use my finger. Yeah, right in here. It's almost more of a tactile.
Yeah,
portrait.
okay.
Now, on the other side, as with all of the monuments in the Shakespeare's Great Garden, on the other side, I have in raised bronze letters the epilogue, which are the final words of Shakespeare, in which he states that, in effect, he's retiring from the theater. Um, I think what I attempted to do is, on the front side, I wanted to give imagery that could be felt and viewed in bronze cast. And on the reverse side, I wanted to give an excerpt in raised bronze letters that comes from Shakespeare's plays.
And again, you know, lots of texture in this. And do you mind just talking a little bit how you create some of these textures? I mean, I'm looking particularly up here above his head. This sort of like cross hatching and
well, my modeling of portraits is primarily done with my fingers, adding a bit at a time to a nose, to a mouth, to a beard, to a face. And then in the area that you asked me above the face, those are different sculpture tool markings. And it's related in terms of application of plastilina, Rome of plastilina. But I guess it's simply to say that the portrait is more with your finger, created with your fingers, and textures are with tool marks.
Yeah, I'm moving this around a little bit so I can just blow up some of these details I couldn't do in the full screen. And of course, the best thing is to come on campus and to see them. But
yeah, because at the Metropolitan Museum and most museums, National Gallery, the guards say don't touch. In open air exhibitions of sculpture, I say, you say, Lucinda, do touch. Because that's how sculptors create, by touching, feeling, and seeing.
Let's see, we've got another question. Can you speak a little about your philosophy of spiritual realism? What does that entail exactly?
Well, Anthony Jansen, sorry, the son of W.H. Jansen, who wrote the infamous History of Art, a very respected, companion.
Bible. Yeah, the Bible.
Yeah, the Bible, exactly. Well, Tony, after his father's death, curated the editions on female art, on photography in I think it was the 4th, the 5th, and the 6th edition. And it was he that I met when he was the curator of the Florida State Museum, known as the Ringling Museum. That, by the way, has the largest collection in North America of the paintings of Titian. Now, Titian right now is on display at Isabella Stewart Gardner's Museum.
Yeah, in Boston. Yeah.
Boston, and my wife and her sister and their family went up from New York to view it. I would have gone, of course, but I had certain things I had to take care of. In any case, the question is referring to the observation of Tony Jansen when he looked at St. Michael and the Peace Fountain. That's where it derives from.
Mm, mm, mm,
But I think it's not exclusive to one artist. I think that, there is within the purview the freedom to express many spiritual themes.
mhm, mhm,
Yes, being for 4 decades the sculptor in residence at St. John the Divine,
mhm,
um, but I think many painters and sculptors, printmakers and poets, should they choose,
mhm,
they have the opportunity to have a spiritual realism statement.
mhm, mhm. Well, Greg, we thank you for taking time from your schedule. I know you've got a lot of irons in the fire, figuratively and literally. But we really appreciate everything you and the Newington Cropsey Foundation has done to make this exhibition happen, and also for the fellowships that the foundation has provided for our students. For those of you who aren't aware of the fellowship that's been awarded to 4 students to study with artists on the sculptural process, and we actually had it at St. John's College this past summer due to COVID, but we're hoping that this will continue next year up on the Hudson and in Paris, and hope that everybody will stay safe. But it's been really wonderful to see their evolution as artists and as individuals, and the product that they've come from it. So I'm anxious to see these pieces cast here in the next few months. But we thank you really for all of your effort. And this has been recorded, so we will post this on the website one day this week. So if any of you care to listen to parts of this again or want to move this on, we'll set up a link for it. So I guess we'll conclude. Thank you again for this enlightening interview. And it also gives me an opportunity to go back out and look at those sculptures this afternoon and study some of those aspects a little more. So
Thank you, Lucinda. It's a great pleasure, an honor.
Yeah.
So
Well,
glad that
and,
this opportunity on Sunday.
well, thank you very much. And I hope we'll talk soon, and hope everyone enjoys this incredible Sunday afternoon. Take care.